Hello, imagine somebody tells you, my consciousness will be repeated exactly as it is, as I have it now, in some person in the future. Even if that person doesn't have the same name. Then the first thing you will say to this conversation partner is, well, if that person has a different name, then his or her consciousness, depending on the sex of your conversation partner, will not be the same if that person has a different name. Then, if your conversation partner tells you, well, these are details, but my consciousness, the way I feel, will be repeated, he or she doesn't say may, will be repeated in another person in the future. Then you must say, the experiences you go through in life are what makes you you. It is not possible that any person in the future will have the same experiences that you have had in your life until now. I have to open a bracket here on a topic which deserves a separate video entirely, and that is the topic of hard determinism. I have made a video on this topic earlier, link in the description, where I showed why, even with the deterministic action of the classical mechanical forces and the interaction of particles in the universe, because of nonlinear algorithms and other mathematics of nature discovered by complexity theory, which is from a modern science founded by the Brussels School of Scientists, most of them mathematicians. Google it. It is clear that it is impossible at one moment, for example the Big Bang, for the future structure and function of the universe to be determined, let alone life and how life will evolve. To cut a long story short, we may use our imperfect language and say, nature is creative. You must understand that phrase in the proper abstract way, because there isn't an object called nature which does something. By this we mean everything, the new emergent objects that appear, with their emergent properties, one of which is DNA. And the following complexity is the human brain. A quotation about which I will read in a moment will make your conversational partner realize that his or her statement, my consciousness will be exactly repeated, is nothing but an embarrassment. So, I have taken this from Herrick Fromm's book, The Anatomy of Human Destructiveness, where Fromm, contrary to the title, proves that there is no neurological center in the brain which causes aggression, that humans have evolved and are characterized by 1. The ever-decreasing determination of behavior by instincts, and 2. By the growth of the brain, and particularly of the neocortex, which is 3 times as large as that of even the hominid ancestors, and a truly fantastic number of interneuronal connections, which result in your character and in your consciousness. Here is a moment to say that your consciousness is not a little homunculus sitting somewhere in your brain, judging the decisions and thoughts that your brain has, but it is the whole network from the interconnections that the neurons make. Fromm consults R.B. Livingston's Brain Circuitry and Neurology, where he gives a quotation from Judson Herrick's book Brains of Rats and Man. Judson Herrick has tried to give an approximate idea of the potentialities of neuronal circuits. A quotation: every neuron of the cerebral cortex is enmeshed in a tangle of very fine fibers of great complexity, some of which come from very remote parts. It is probably safe to say that the majority of cortical neurons are directly or indirectly connected with every cortical field. This is the anatomical basis of cortical associational processes. The interconnections of these associational fibers form an anatomical mechanism which permits, during a train of cortical associations, numbers of different functional combinations of cortical neurons that far surpass any figures ever suggested by the astronomers in measuring the distances of stars. It is the capacity for making this sort of combination and recombination of the nervous elements that determines the practical value of the system. If 1,000,000 cortical nerve cells were connected one with another in groups of only 2 neurons each in all possible combinations, the number of different patterns of interneuronic connections thus provided will be expressed by 10 to the power of 2,783,000. On the basis of the known structure of the cortex, the number of intercellular connections that are anatomically present and available for use in a short series of cortical neurons of the visual area simultaneously excited by the retinal image would far exceed the 10 to the power of 2,783,000 already mentioned as the theoretically possible combinations in groups of 2 only. Close the quotation. For comparative purposes, Livingstone adds, recall that the number of atoms in the universe is estimated to be about 10 to the power of 66. But the question is that no consciousness is exactly the same as any other consciousness. Every consciousness is unique and will not be repeated, not in the future, not in the past, not at present, because everybody is unique. So I would advise you to tell your conversation partner, if he or she insists that his consciousness will be exactly repeated, to tell him not to worry, that will not happen. He or she can continue living his or her life, until he or she dies, and not to worry anymore about somebody else in the future that will feel the same. That would not happen. There will be, again, people who will think in a very different manner, but it will not be the same. The brain that has been built by genes is very complex, and it is a system, it is the integration of all the parts of the brain, all the neurons, and different parts of the brain have different functions. That is what our consciousness is. There is not one little homunculus in the brain that takes decision or watches how the brain, or what the brain has decided, and then judges it. The interconnections, the integration of all the neurons and synapses and so on, that is what our consciousness is. So I would advise you to tell your conversation partner not to worry about anybody in the future having the same consciousness as he or she does. That is not possible. Bye!